At 3:47 a.m. on October 13, 1982, the screaming stopped. Dead silence. But the dogs in Harlan County? They didn't stop. They howled until dawn like they knew something was still alive in the dark. And here's the insane part, this wasn't the first time silence had cut across the Cumberland Mountains like a blade. For 3 decades, something rotten had been festering in the belly of Copperhead Hollow. This wasn't just a town. It was a trap. Rotting porch boards creaked under bare feet. The wells bled metallic rust. The earth itself stayed damp, as if the ground knew it was swallowing more than rain. Population? 43. At least, that's what the records said. But in Copperhead Hollow, souls didn't add up so neatly. Some were born. Some vanished. And some were never meant to be counted. The road in was a scar of gravel the county gave up on back in the 1960s. Mail came twice a week, if the postman dared. Electricity? Officially there in 74, but most families still clung to kerosene lamps, as if afraid to light up the darkness too much. At the dead end of the hollow sat the McCretty compound. Imagine trailers and lean-tos multiplying like mushrooms after a storm. By 1980, 3 generations packed that bend in the creek, led by their iron-fisted patriarch, Ezekiel. Here's where it gets twisted, 6 children. A swarm of grandchildren. But the family tree didn't look like a tree at all. It looked like a thorn bush, knotted, tangled, impossible to touch without drawing blood. County records reveal the first bombshell. Between 1975 and 1982, there were 14 births at the compound. But only 9 death certificates were ever filed. 5 lives erased. No graves. No explanations. And then came the woman who dared to pull back the curtain. Her name was Margaret Finley, a social worker who made one fatal mistake. She tried to enroll the McCretty kids in school. What she wrote in her September 5, 1981 report. Severe developmental delays. Malnourishment. Signs of neglect. But what she didn't know yet, what no one outside the hollow knew, was that Copperhead Hollow wasn't just hiding poverty. It was hiding something much darker. And once you hear what came next, you'll never look at family the same way again. At first, Margaret thought it was neglect. Malnourished kids. Thin faces. That's bad enough, right? But then, she noticed something way worse. Several of the children looked identical. Same faces. Same eyes. Same bloodline, but the record said they were cousins. And the youngest ones? They weren't shy. They were terrified, flinching at any adult who wasn't family. Margaret filed her report on September 5, 1981. But her supervisor buried it. Mountain families have their ways, he said. Translation? Stay quiet, or else. Because Ezekiel McCretty wasn't just some backwoods patriarch. He had allies in the sheriff's department. Men who remembered his moonshine keeping their families alive during the lean years. Loyalty runs deep in the mountains, and some silences are too dangerous to break. But here's where it gets chilling. The hollow itself started fighting back. Hunters claimed animals avoided McCretty land like it was cursed. The creek running past the compound? Suddenly it flowed murky all year round, its sediment didn't even match the local geology. And at night, when the wind shifted, people heard sounds they swore no human or animal could make. Something was growing in the dark. By summer 1982, the youngest kids never crossed the tree line again. The older ones came into town only to trade pelts and jars of clear liquid, moonshine, maybe something worse. They never looked Clarks in the eye. They moved like ghosts who knew noise meant punishment. So here's the nightmare question. What would you do if just 5 miles from your house, you knew something unspeakable was happening, but every instinct screamed that digging too deep could make you the next victim? That answer came on an October night in 1982. Deputy Sheriff Michael Torres rolled into Copperhead Hollow after reports of gunshots. He thought he'd seen it all: poverty, rough mountain families, bad moonshine stills. But the moment he cracked his car door, the smell hit him like a punch. Sweet rot, smoke, and something else that made his stomach twist. This wasn't poverty. This was something that had learned to wear poverty like a mask. The gravel crunched under his boots as he stepped toward the compound. His flashlight beam cut through the mist, and what Torres was about to uncover that night would haunt Kentucky police files for decades. Whispered about in break rooms. Locked away from rookies. Because some family trees don't just grow crooked. They grow poisonous. Torres crept toward the double-wide, sagging in the middle like a broken spine. His flashlight sliced through the dark. And that's when he saw it. Something moved in the window. Fast. Too fast. The air itself seemed to taste like blood, copper and fear clinging to his tongue. Then, out of nowhere, 3 children stepped from behind a rusted pickup truck. But these weren't normal kids. Their ages? Impossible to tell. 8? 18? Malnourished, twisted, stunted in ways the human body shouldn't bend. Their clothes shredded. But their eyes, oh God, their eyes weren't afraid. They were predators. Watching. Calculating. Waiting. The oldest, matted blonde hair, face smeared with dirt, finally spoke. "Ain't supposed to be here after dark," she hissed, her voice way too steady. Granddaddy don't like strangers. Every instinct told Torres to back away. But he identified himself anyway, saying he was there about reports of gunfire. The kids didn't flinch. Just exchanged glances, silent communication like wolves circling prey. Then the girl's head tilted, toward the largest trailer. Light leaked through torn curtains. Torres froze. Inside, he heard it. The sounds of a family dinner. The clink of silverware. Muffled voices. A laugh that didn't sound right. His radio crackled in the silence. "Unit 7, what's your status?" Backup was 40 minutes away. Mountain roads. Black night. He was on his own. The children never blinked. They waited, stone still. Like hunters. Like they knew something he didn't. Torres raised his fist and knocked. The laughter stopped. Dead silence. Then, footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Deliberate. The door creaked open. And standing there was Ezekiel McCretty. Torres recognized the face from old arrest photos, moonshiner, outlaw. But now? Time had carved him into something harder, monstrous. His grin revealed teeth filed into points. "Evening, deputy," he drawled, voice low and sharp. "Bit late for social calls, ain't it?" Torres's flashlight beam slid past him, into the main room. And what he saw nearly made him stagger. A long table. A feast spread across it. Steam rising from bowls. Meat sizzling, rich and heavy in the air. But something wasn't right. The proportions were wrong. The shadows bent in unnatural angles. The people sitting around the table. They weren't just family. They were something else. Something you couldn't put into words. And in that instant, Torres realized. He wasn't investigating a crime scene. He'd just walked into the jaws of a predator's den. The room froze. Forks hung in midair, mouths open, like time itself had stopped. It was the feast that never ended. Torres's breath caught as he counted, 7 adults, maybe a dozen kids. But in the dim light, their bodies blurred together, faces half hidden, shadows twisting them into something barely human. And yet, their eyes moved. Every single one of them. Locked on Torres. Not with fear. Not with curiosity. But with the laser focus of predators weighing their prey. Torres swallowed hard. "Just checking on reports of gunshots," he muttered, his hand inching toward his weapon. "Making sure everyone's safe." Ezekiel's smile widened, teeth gleaming like blades. Filed. Sharpened. Weaponized. "Safe as houses, deputy." Just doing a little night hunting. These mountains," his voice dropped to a growl. "They are full of things that only come out after dark." The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Every fiber of Torres's training screamed, "Press forward, demand answers, search the property." But the way those eyes followed him from the shadows, it wasn't desperation, it wasn't poverty. It was hunger. Hunger that had been fed for years, and wanted more. Torres backed away slowly, boots crunching the gravel, heart hammering in his chest. And then he saw it. Behind the trailer. Half buried in the dirt. A child's bicycle. Its wheels spun lazily in the mountain breeze. Purple frame. Silver streamers fluttering like fingers, beckoning him closer. Torres froze. He knew that bike. Everyone in eastern Kentucky knew that bike. It was on every missing flyer for miles, Amy Chen. 7 years old. Vanished from a camping trip 6 months ago. And here it was. Rotting in the dirt of Copperhead Hollow. In that moment, Torres's fear crystallized into something far worse than suspicion. This wasn't some backwoods eccentricity. This was a feeding ground. And suddenly, the disappearances that had haunted Kentucky for nearly 2 decades all pointed to one poisoned route. His hands shook as he raised his camera. The flash lit up the night, burning the bicycle into evidence forever. But in his gut, Torres knew the truth. He'd just uncovered a secret the mountains had been hiding. A secret that didn't want to stay buried. For years, the mountains had their stories straight. Kids got lost. They slipped into rivers. Fell into mineshafts. Vanished into the Appalachian wilderness where bodies were rarely recovered. Rangers told grieving parents it was nature, it was bad luck, it was just the mountains. But Torres now knew the truth. These kids hadn't been lost. They'd been found. 23 children. Ages 5 to 12. Gone since 1964. And their trail ended here, inside Copperhead Hollow. Torres's hand shook as he grabbed the patrol car. "MIC, dispatch, I need immediate backup. State police, now." His voice was steady, but his pulse hammered like a war drum. That's when he felt it. Movement. Shapes, emerging from the tree line. Sliding out of the dark. Surrounding his car. The McCready children. They didn't run. They didn't scream. They circled with perfect, inhuman synchronization. Like a pack that had been hunting together their whole lives. Their bare feet crunched the gravel in silence, their shadows flickering across his windshield like specters. And then, she appeared. The oldest girl. Hair matted, skin pale as bone. She pressed her face against the glass, inches from Torres's own. And under the sickly green glow of his dashboard, he saw them. Her teeth. Filed to points. Just like Ezekiel's. Her lips moved slowly. No sound. But Torres didn't need to hear it. The message was crystal clear. "You're not leaving the hollow tonight." His radio erupted into static. Deafening, relentless. He twisted the dial, shouting into the MIC, but there was no signal. No backup. No lifeline. Then the car began to rock. At first, a nudge. Then harder. Then harder. The patrol vehicle groaned, headlights bouncing off the twisted trailers. The children pushed in unison, their strength far greater than their size should allow. Torres's instincts screamed at him to draw his weapon. He pulled it free, hand trembling. But how do you aim at children? Even children whose eyes glowed like predators and whose nails scraped the glass like claws? This wasn't innocence. This was innocence corrupted, weaponized. Torres's mind flashed back to academy training, to the lecture on the Sawney Bin clan in 16th century Scotland. A family of cannibals that preyed on travelers for decades, wiped off the earth only when their existence became too monstrous to ignore. Back then, he thought it was a bizarre footnote in history. But now? He realized something chilling. Some horrors never die. They adapt. They survive. And he was staring straight into the Appalachian version of it. Weeks later, Detective Frank Morrison's official report would reveal the unthinkable: systematic predation, entire bloodlines warped by isolation and hunger. But on that night, Torres didn't have the luxury of reports or hindsight. He had one choice: fight, or vanish into the hollow like the 23 before him. Granny McCretty. The name alone carried the weight of folklore, the kind of whispered warning passed down through generations of mountain families. But Torres wasn't hearing it as folklore. He was staring at her in the flesh, an emaciated matriarch whose very presence bent the night around her. Her eyes reflected the firelight not with age, but with something ancient, something that had seen centuries of blood spilled in the dark. The lullaby swelled, growing louder, sharper, vibrating through the glass of Torres's patrol car until he felt it in his teeth. His training screamed at him to move, to act, but his body betrayed him, muscles sluggish, eyelids heavy. It wasn't just a song. It was a weapon, a siren's call honed across generations. The torches closed in. Ezekiel raised the rifle, not to fire, but to signal. And at that gesture, the singing stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the song, thick and crushing, like the night itself was holding its breath. Granny stepped forward, her voice carrying across the hollow without effort, as though the trees themselves were amplifying her words. Blood don't spoil in these hills, deputy. It ripens. The children outside the car stilled, waiting. The adults moved in unison, their shadows twisting on the tree trunks like black vines. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't madness. This was ritual. Centuries of it. Torres's hand tightened on his weapon, the cold steel an anchor against the pull of their voices. But another sound stole his attention. From the woods, high, sharp, unmistakable, came the echo of a child's scream. Not in harmony. Not rehearsed. Real. Terrified. Torres's heart seized. Amy Chen. The missing girl's bicycle hadn't been the end of the trail. She was still alive. Somewhere in the maze of trailers and lean-tos, surrounded by predators disguised as kin, a child was waiting for rescue. And Torres knew then, with brutal clarity, that he had a choice to make. He could drive away and live. Or he could step out of that patrol car, into the firelit circle of the McCretty clan, and gamble his life on the chance that one stolen child could be saved. The mountain air hung heavy, expectant, as Granny raised a single skeletal hand toward him. And the hollow waited for his answer. Torres gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white, the chill of Granny's words sinking deeper than the mountain air. He wasn't the first, and unless he found a way out, he wouldn't be the last. The idea that other officers had stood where he sat, fighting for their lives only to vanish into the clan's record-keeping, sent a wave of nausea through him. The torchlight shimmered across the faces in the circle. Some of the younger adults grinned, lips curling back to reveal filed teeth that glinted like wet bone. Others simply stared with the dull patience of butchers waiting for the slaughterhouse bell. Torres forced himself to breathe slow, controlled, the way he had during firefights. Panic was what they wanted. Panic was their first trap. His eyes darted to the tree line. No backup. No signal. No escape. Just the hollow, its secrets pressing in like the walls of a coffin. He tried the engine again, but the starter only groaned, a mechanical death rattle swallowed by the night. Blood remembers, Granny crooned, as if reading his thoughts. These mountains feed their own. You stepped off the road when you come down here, deputy. Ain't no road gonna lead you back out. The circle tightened by inches. Torres spotted the girl with matted blonde hair again, the one who had warned him at first. She stood apart from the others, her torch casting just enough light for him to see the faintest flicker of conflict in her eyes. She mouthed something at him, quick, urgent. A single word. Run. But how? Where? The hollow was alive, its very soil rigged to consume the lost. He thought of the pits, the snares, the tunnels he didn't even know existed yet. The McCrettys weren't just hunters, they were architects of fear, engineers of capture. Torres's hand slipped to the door handle. One move and the circle would close. But staying meant waiting for them to tear open the car like wolves around a carcass. His heart hammered. His breath fogged the windshield. Then, snap. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the circle, a twig broke. The clan froze, every torch tilting in unison toward the sound. For the first time that night, Torres saw something that looked like hesitation on their faces. Something else was moving in the woods. And it wasn't part of the McCready clan. Torres pressed himself against the damp earthen wall, his breath shallow, the taste of mold and iron thick in his mouth. Every instinct screamed at him to climb back up, to risk the torchlight and the circle rather than descend deeper into a place built for one purpose, captivity. But the sounds above left no choice. The whistles grew closer, echoing like hunting hawks, each call answered by another until the night itself seemed to be speaking in the clan's language. The tunnels stretched in both directions, vanishing into blackness. Torres aimed his dying flashlight one way, then the other. The beam flickered weakly across graffiti etched into the walls, stick figures with excess for eyes, crude drawings of children held by claw-like hands, tally marks scratched deep into the wood. Hundreds of them. He moved forward, careful with each step, avoiding the patches of earth that seemed too thin, too deliberate. His boot struck something metallic. He crouched and found a child's shoe, its pink laces caked in dried mud. Next to it, a ragged scrap of fabric torn from a cartoon print pajama shirt. Torres swallowed hard, bile rising. These weren't just tunnels. They were storage. Holding pens. Graves. Above him, heavy footsteps thudded directly overhead. Dust rained down, and through a sliver of light in the ceiling, Torres saw Ezekiel McCready's silhouette pass, rifle in hand. The clan wasn't just searching, they were driving him. Herding him deeper, like cattle funneled toward the slaughter chute. A sudden rush of cold air brushed his face. Another opening. A side passage sloping downward. Against every instinct, Torres followed it. The air grew colder, wetter, carrying a smell that rooted itself in his bones. The passage opened into a chamber wider than any he'd yet seen. And that's where he found them. Rows of shelves carved into the rock itself, lined with mason jars. Each jar filled with cloudy liquid, and inside each, small, pale shapes that made his stomach twist. Tiny hands, tiny feet, suspended like specimens in a grotesque museum. Torres staggered back, nearly dropping his flashlight. His mind reeled, fighting to deny what his eyes told him. This wasn't just hunger. This was ritual. A tradition. A family archive written in flesh and bone. Then he heard it, so faint at first he thought it was in his head. The lullaby. Rising again, drifting through the tunnels, sweet and poisonous. But this time, it wasn't coming from above. It was coming from behind him. Fire. What happens when you discover a family has been hunting children for generations? The tunnels twisted like a living maze, shadows flickering across the walls, turning every turn into a trap, every step into a gamble. Torres fought to keep his bearings, but the deeper he went, the more the ground itself seemed to pull him into madness. And then, he found the chamber. At first, it looked ordinary. But then his light landed on the details that nearly shattered his sanity. Children's clothing, neatly folded by size. Tiny shoes, arranged in perfect rows. Stuffed animals, set in place as though they'd just been played with. And carved into the wooden walls? Names. Dozens of names. Each paired with dates. Explosion symbol, a ledger of victims. An inventory of innocence stretching back to 1959. Some of the names Torres recognized from old missing children cases. Others were so ancient the families who had grieved them were probably long gone. This wasn't random cruelty. This was generational. A hunting tradition sharpened to perfection across decades. Then his flashlight caught something lower on the wall. The handwriting was shaky, childlike, carved with desperate hands. My name is Tommy Walsh. Today is my birthday. I am 8 years old. If someone finds this, tell my mom and dad I love them, and I'm sorry I went with the singing lady. The date, August 12, 1979. Torres froze. He knew that case. Tommy Walsh, the boy who vanished during a camping trip. His parents had spent every dollar chasing leads and psychics, never knowing their son had survived long enough to scratch his final goodbye into the wall of an underground prison. And above ground, the nightmare was moving closer. Torres could hear boots thudding overhead, voices plotting the hunt. Smoke them out. No, send in the dogs. But then came the voice that chilled the marrow in his bones. Granny McCready. Turn loose the young ones. They know these holes better than anybody, and they can smell fear from a mile away. Explosion symbol. The air trembled. Torres realized with dawning horror, they weren't talking about dogs. The sound started trickling down through the earth. Not barking. Not human. Something in between. High-pitched yelps mixed with laughter, hungry, eager, vibrating with anticipation. The McCready children had been unleashed into the tunnels. And Torres understood with crystal clarity the darkest truth of all. Explosion symbol. These kids weren't just raised to hunt. They were raised to believe other children were food. Fire. How do you fight enemies who don't know the difference between hunting and playing? The tunnels shook with sound, not quite footsteps, not quite crawling. Something in between. Something primal. Torres's pulse spiked as he realized what was coming for him, the McCready children. Small hands, bare feet, skittering against the dirt walls with inhuman confidence. They weren't lost in this maze. They were the maze. Generations of training had turned them into predators built for darkness, their eyes sharpened for gloom, their ears tuned to the faintest breath. Explosion symbol. This wasn't a game of hide-and-seek. This was their game. Torres pressed himself into a narrow alcove, lungs locked, every heartbeat like a gunshot. In his chest. And then he heard it, the sounds that should have been innocent. Whispers. Clicks. Giggles. But down here, they weren't innocent at all. They were communication. A language. A war cry disguised as playtime. They were hunting him. Together. With the patience and coordination of a military unit. And worst of all? They were enjoying it. A forensic report months later would call it complete moral dissociation, children raised without ever being taught the line between prey and playmate. To them, stalking a man wasn't murder. It was recess. Then the voices grew clearer. The oldest girl, maybe 14, the same one who'd mocked him beside his patrol car, gave orders with the icy calm of a battlefield commander. Deputy man's scared. Can smell it on him. Thick as molasses. He's smart though. Trained. Military quiet. Gotta be careful. Explosion symbol. Torres froze. They weren't just chasing him blindly. They were analyzing him. Predicting him. Another voice piped up, younger but just as sure. Found his blood trail. He scraped his hand. He's moving toward the old processing rooms. Torres's stomach dropped. They weren't guessing. They were tracking him, in real time. And worse than the words themselves, was the sound underneath them. The barely contained laughter of children about to win their favorite game. Fire. What's more terrifying than being hunted by monsters? Realizing the monsters are children. Torres's stomach clenched as the truth hit him. He was bleeding. A shallow cut on his hand, unnoticed in the panic, was now a beacon in the dark. To him, it was nothing. To them, it was a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to his throat. Explosion symbol. He's marked. They can smell him. That cut had doomed him. And the children knew it. Their whispers echoed through the tunnels like a hive mind of predators closing in. They weren't scared. They weren't panicked. They were planning. Block the tunnels. Herd him toward the meat rooms. Kill him quick, or keep him alive. They debated it casually, like kids choosing what game to play after school. Torres's pulse pounded. He couldn't stay hidden. He pushed deeper into the tunnel system, desperate for escape. But every twist, every dead end, revealed another horror. One chamber was worse than anything he'd seen. A butcher's workshop, hooks dangling from the ceiling, salt barrels stacked neatly, cutting tools laid out with surgical precision. The walls were carved with diagrams of human dismemberment, annotated like recipes. Explosion symbol. What kind of family passes that knowledge to their children? Behind him, the whispers shifted. The excitement was gone, replaced with something new. Concern. Then came the oldest girl's voice, sharp, urgent. Somebody's coming. Big people. Get back upstairs. And in that instant, Torres heard it, engines roaring, shouts echoing through the hollow, boots hitting the earth. Police cars revolving light, 6 Kentucky State Police cruisers. 2 FBI vehicles. Red and blue lights painting the night sky like a war zone. Backup had finally arrived. But Torres knew better than to breathe easy. Because if the McCready children could smell fear, what would they do when they smelled blood, chaos, and an army descending on their home? High voltage sign. The night didn't just light up, it detonated. Floodlights ripped across the hollow, strobing the world into a nightmare that revealed the true scope of the McCready stronghold. Trailers, sheds, underground entrances. This wasn't a family homestead. It was a fortress of horror, designed to swallow victims and erase them from history. But the FBI hadn't come here for just one missing deputy. This was Harvest Moon, a 2-year investigation finally bursting into daylight. And the McCreadys were just one piece of something much bigger. Explosion symbol. One family of predators wasn't the problem, it was a network. For decades, families buried in the Appalachian wilderness had been living off resources no one could explain. Children vanishing in the woods, campers gone without a trace, every disappearance mapping back to bloodlines that guarded their land like kingdoms. Agent Patricia Valdez had been chasing these ghosts since 1980, when a routine audit revealed the impossible: too many missing children, too many coincidences, too many hunters hiding in plain sight. And now, tonight, her operation's code name, Harvest Moon, felt like prophecy. Torres stumbled out of the tunnels, drenched in dirt and blood, raving about rooms filled with children's clothes and ledgers carved into the walls. But as agents stormed the compound, the truth made his words sound almost merciful. Inside the main trailer, tactical lights exposed industrial-grade meat grinders, freezers humming with stolen power, and kitchens converted into slaughterhouses. Not for livestock. Not for deer. For people. And then came the worst revelation of all. The children. Ranging from 5 to 17, they weren't just victims, they were soldiers. Raised in darkness, conditioned to kill, trained to defend their family like a pack of apex predators. When agents tried to separate them, the response was instant. They didn't cry. They didn't plead. They attacked. High voltage sign, small bodies moving with the ferocity of wolves, eyes blazing, teeth bared. This wasn't a rescue. It was a war zone. Dr. Maria Santos would later write in her evaluation, these children were not kidnapped. They were created. Molded into weapons of loyalty and hunger. They cannot distinguish love from violence, family from predator. But in that moment, no psychology report mattered. Because the agents were outnumbered, surrounded, and staring down an army of feral children who had never been taught the difference between a game and a kill. High voltage sign, by sunrise, Copperhead Hollow was no longer a crime scene. It was a revelation. What the FBI uncovered inside the McCready compound didn't just confirm the rumors of cannibal families in the Appalachians, it proved something far more terrifying. This wasn't desperation. It wasn't survival. It was infrastructure. Granny McCready herself, hauled out of the main trailer in handcuffs, spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had never once questioned her way of life. Her taped statement still chills every agent who hears it. Ain't no different than hunting deer or rabbits. World's got too many people anyway. We're just doing what nature intended, strong eating the weak. To her, there was no crime. No sin. Just the law of nature, refined into ritual. And the records proved it. Open file folder 3 full FBI warehouses would be needed to store the evidence. personal belongings of victims dating back to the 1950s. Handwritten kill logs with weights, ages, and meat quality notes. Photographs documenting the family's transformation from chance predation to an organized hunting operation. Training manuals on how to lure children, disable adults, and preserve harvests for maximum yield. This wasn't madness. This was a curriculum. But the darkest discovery wasn't in the freezers or the ledgers. It was in the children. Raised without schools, without contact with the outside world, without ever being told that eating human flesh was taboo, they had no framework for morality. To them, outsiders weren't neighbors. They were prey. Scales hash, and now came the question no courtroom was ready to answer. What do you do with children who don't know they are monsters? Can you punish them? Can you fix them? Or are they too far gone? As dawn broke, Agent Patricia Valdez received the call she had been dreading. Copperhead Hollow wasn't an anomaly. Police cars revolving like other compounds had already been identified, in West Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina. Families fleeing their land in the middle of the night, abandoning homes. That concealed the same architecture of horror. A network. A system. A hidden America that had been perfecting this way of life for generations. Copperhead Hollow was just the beginning. Police cars revolving like, imagine uncovering a secret network of cannibal families stretching across 4 states, and realizing they've been perfecting the hunt for over a century. This wasn't just one compound. This was an exodus. Entire families torching evidence, vanishing into the night, leaving behind nothing but burnt-out trailers and the stench of smoke. And that's when investigators realized the horrifying truth: Copperhead Hollow was just the tip of an iceberg that went miles deep into America's forgotten wilderness. For over 100 years, clans had been sharing victims, swapping techniques, and carving out hunting grounds like medieval warlords dividing kingdoms. Each family controlled its own slice of Appalachia, and together, they turned the mountains into one gigantic human feeding ground. And here's the insane part: these clans weren't just lurking in the shadows. They had systems. A full-blown rotation cycle. If heat got too strong in Kentucky, they packed up and slid into Tennessee. When Tennessee got dangerous, they passed the hunt to cousins in North Carolina or West Virginia. It was like a traveling carnival of terror. The feast itself was on the move. But how did they stay connected without getting caught? That's the twist. Investigators discovered a hidden web of coded communication. Harmless-looking classifieds in local papers. Cryptic notes left at post offices. Even pirate CB radio channels no one at the FCC was tracking. When the McCready compound went down, a warning spread through the entire network in hours. By sunrise, 7 other family groups had already melted into the mountains. The FBI and ATF's 1983 Joint Task Force finally confirmed it: at least 7 clans, operating across Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee, and North Carolina. Each one with its own hunting style, its own territory, its own victims. The Buchanan clan of West Virginia? They stalked lonely hitchhikers on the black stretches of I-77. The Crowleys of North Carolina? They prowled the Appalachian Trail, preying on backpackers who thought they were safe in the woods. Every clan had its specialty. Different terrain, different bait. But the rules never changed: find the loneliest victim. Lure them into the dark. Erase the evidence so clean that even the most desperate search party would never find a trace. And that was their secret weapon: selection. These monsters chose people who wouldn't be missed right away. Runaways. Drifters. Tourists with no itinerary. Families that never even knew where to start looking. By the time a missing person report was filed, the trail was already cold. By the time investigators even realized something was wrong, the feast had already moved to another mountain. This wasn't survival. This wasn't desperation. High voltage sign: this was a generational machine of predation, and it was still running. Clapperboard: what if I told you there are children, rescued straight out of cannibal compounds, who had no idea eating people was wrong? That's the nightmare investigators stepped into. These weren't normal kids. They couldn't read, couldn't write, and when social workers asked them about morality, they stared blankly. To them, hunting people wasn't evil, it was just family tradition. Dr. Amanda Foster, one of the psychologists who worked with the survivors, wrote, "These subjects see predation as a normal family activity. They genuinely don't understand why society sees it as wrong." And unlike cults that hide behind religion, these families had no divine excuse. No prophecies, no scripture. Just a cold, brutal logic: eating people was survival. But the most jaw-dropping revelation came from Ezekiel McCready himself. During his 1982 interrogation, he leaned forward and admitted, "Been doing this since my granddaddy's time." He learned it from his granddaddy, who learned it from the old country. Ain't nothing new about it. Wait, the old country? Investigators dug into his words and discovered something insane. This wasn't a modern invention. It traced back to rural Scotland and Ireland, where certain isolated communities in the 18th and 19th centuries had relied on the same horrifying practices to survive. The McCreadys hadn't started this way of life, they had imported it, carrying the tradition across the ocean and perfecting it for centuries in Appalachia's hidden valleys. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't starvation. This was a cultural legacy. Generations raised to see human beings as livestock. And that led to the ultimate question: how do you dismantle an entire way of life built on hunting people? The answer came in the form of Operation Mountain Sweep, the most ambitious strike law enforcement had ever attempted. A coordinated, all-out raid targeting every known clan location at once. No warnings. No leaks. No chance for escape. But here's the kicker. Even after Mountain Sweep, even after compounds were torched and families scattered, hikers in Appalachia still whisper about what they find deep in the mountains. Abandoned cabins. Hidden tunnels. Freezers scarred with claw marks. Empty now, but were they really abandoned? High voltage sign, because the truth is, no one knows if the network was ever fully wiped out. Police cars revolving light at 4 a.m. sharp, November 15, 1982, 17 compounds, 4 states, and the single biggest FBI raid Appalachia had ever seen went live. This was Operation Mountain Sweep, and what they found made even the darkest theories look tame. Explosion symbol hook number 1. Imagine opening a hidden freezer and finding personal belongings of victims dating back to the 1920s, piled like trophies of horror. That's exactly what agents uncovered. But the most shocking discovery? This wasn't just a twisted family hobby. It was a multi-generational network, over 200 individuals across 12 extended clans, all connected by blood, marriage, and a code of silence. Some family lines had been hunting humans since the 1800s. And then came the children. 47 minors were pulled from these compounds. Some infants. Some teenagers. None of them had ever lived in the world you and I know. No schools. No electricity. No plumbing. Several only spoke in a strange dialect, a blend of archaic English and words no linguist could fully trace, like a secret language forged in isolation. But the real terror? Every single one of them had been raised to believe human hunting was just family tradition. Clinical psychologist Dr. Patricia Henley described it best. These subjects have been conditioned to see acts society considers heinous as routine family activity. Their morality has been engineered out of existence. To them, gutting a deer and gutting a person were no different. Meanwhile, the adult members reacted in ways that stunned investigators. Some sat silent, eyes hollow, as if nothing about the raid surprised them. Others, like Ezekiel McCready, cooperated fully, but only because he believed the truth would vindicate him. And that's when the agents realized. This wasn't a crime ring. It wasn't desperation. It was an inherited hunger, a generational machine, refined and perfected over a century. And as dawn rose on November 15, one question ripped through every investigator's mind. High voltage sign: if this network had survived for over 100 years without ever being caught, how many more hidden clans are still out there today? High voltage sign: we don't pretend we're civilized while we're doing it. That wasn't a movie villain. That was Granny McCready, the matriarch of America's most terrifying cannibal network, spitting those words at FBI agents in 1982. Imagine staring at a grandmother who raised entire generations to believe that eating people wasn't evil, it was survival. Some family members were clueless, genuinely confused about why anyone cared. Others? Razor sharp. Cold. They played investigators like a game, protecting their cousins and brothers who had already slipped back into the mountains. And then came the trials. 3 years. 47 convictions. Murder. Kidnapping. Crimes so twisted they stretched across state lines. But here's the insane part, no judge, no jury, no prison sentence could put their culture on trial. Because this wasn't just crime. It was tradition. The evidence? Bone-chilling. Handwritten records stretching back decades. Genealogical charts tying together 200 family members across 12 clans. Songs sung to children celebrating hunts. Campfire stories that passed down ambush techniques like bedtime fairy tales. These weren't just killers. They were building a dark legacy, designed to outlive them. And just when the FBI thought it was over, it wasn't. In 1985, Sarah Buchanan was caught in West Virginia, preparing a brand new hunting ground near the New River Gorge. If she hadn't been stopped, hundreds more travelers might have vanished without a trace. Her arrest marked the official end of Operation Mountain Sweep, but even the feds admitted, some families probably slipped through. Meaning right now, a forgotten trail, a boarded-up cabin, a basement beneath an abandoned farmhouse, could still hide their legacy. And then there's Deputy Michael Torres. He's the man who accidentally uncovered the McCready compound, the domino that started the whole operation. By 1984, he'd quit law enforcement. Moved to Florida. But neighbors noticed something strange. Curtains always shut. Never answered his door at night. Always watching. Always waiting. Because Torres knew the truth. Some horrors never die. They just hide. And the question he left us with is the same one you need to ask yourself. High voltage sign: what if isolation, desperation, and hunger could turn a NY family, even yours, into predators again? Fire: imagine a compound so cursed, the FBI burned it to the ground, yet locals swear. Smoke still rises from that hollow today. Not from fire, but from appetites that will never die. What if something hungry is still out there, watching from the tree line? Because on November 15, 1982 at exactly 4 a.m., the government unleashed Operation Mountain Sweep, the single biggest Appalachian raid in history. 17 locations. 4 states. One mission: wipe out a century-old cannibal network before it spread any further. And the results? Even the FBI wasn't ready. This wasn't decades of horror. It was over 100 years of families hunting families. The evidence filled an entire warehouse at Quantico. Victims' belongings stacked like mountains. Photographs documenting hunts, like your family might document Christmas morning. Genealogical maps that tied 200 individuals across 12 bloodlines. This wasn't random violence. It was an inherited system of predation. But the most disturbing discovery wasn't the records. It was the children. 47 minors. Infants to teenagers. Some had never seen electric light. Others spoke in a hybrid dialect, half archaic English, half language no one could trace. All had been raised to believe human hunting was as normal as farming or fishing. They weren't victims. They were the next generation of predators. Dr. Patricia Headley, the psychologist tasked with studying them, wrote, "These children have been systematically conditioned to see the unthinkable as routine." In other words, they inherited hunger like it was DNA. This was the point where investigators realized this wasn't just about law enforcement. This was about civilization itself, and how easily, when cut off from the world, humanity can slide backward into savagery. High voltage sign: but here's the nightmare no one wants to admit, even after the raids, even after the trials. Empty campsites are still found in the Appalachian wilds. Tents abandoned. No sign of the families who pitched them. Just the chilling feeling that something ancient, patient, and starving, is still out there. So the real question is, was Operation Mountain Sweep an ending, or just the beginning? Fire, what if I told you there was a family so terrifying, they didn't even understand why the FBI thought eating people was a crime? The McCreadys weren't just hiding in the shadows, they were rewriting the rules of humanity itself. Some members, like Ezekiel McCready, sat in court looking genuinely confused, like the legal system was speaking a foreign language. Others were razor-sharp, outsmarting investigators, protecting anyone who might have slipped through the raids. But then came Granny McCready, the matriarch, the monster behind the curtain. And when agents sat across from her on November 20, 1982, she dropped a line so chilling it still echoes decades later: "You'll act like we invented something new. Folks been eating folks since the beginning of time. We're just honest about it. At least we don't pretend we're civilized while we're doing it." This wasn't just crime. This was an attack on the very idea of civilization. The trials dragged on for 3 years. 47 convictions: murder, kidnapping, trafficking. But the courtroom victories didn't answer the question that kept every investigator awake at night: how thin is the line between order and savagery? Because the deeper they dug, the darker it got. The families weren't just hunting. They were documenting. Detailed records. Lineages. Entire archives of horror. These weren't monsters hiding from history, they were preserving it. Children were taught songs celebrating hunts like lullabies. Campfire stories weren't about heroes, they passed down ambush strategies. Rituals weren't bonding them to humanity, they were cutting them off from it. Imagine growing up where hunting humans was your bedtime story. The last thread of the network snapped in 1985, when Sarah Buchanan was caught trying to open a new hunting ground near the New River Gorge. Her arrest marked the official end of Operation Mountain Sweep. Official, but not absolute. Because even the FBI admitted isolated families could still be out there. What if the nightmare didn't end? What if it just scattered? The man who uncovered it all, Deputy Michael Torres, retired a year earlier. He ran as far as he could, Florida. But even there, neighbors noticed something strange. He never opened his curtains. He never answered the door after dark. The man who looked the devil in the eye never felt safe again. And here's the question that should haunt every one of us: what do you do with the knowledge that some horrors can't be erased, only buried? And how do you close your eyes at night, knowing hunger this old never really dies? Because if survival shaped them once, what's stopping it from happening again? What if I told you entire families vanished, not because they got lost, but because something hungrier than man was waiting for them? The Mr. Compound didn't just collapse, it was burned to the ground by federal agents in 1982. But locals swear the story didn't end there. Because on some nights, smoke still rises from that hollow, and it's not from any fire you can put out. That smoke is said to come from appetites that were never satisfied. And even today, deep in Appalachia, rangers stumble on eerie campsites. Tents left behind. Fires gone cold. Families erased. The only thing left? A silence so heavy, it feels like something is still watching from the tree line. We've barely scratched the surface. The next case is even darker, and way more disturbing. Subscribe now, because once you hear it, you'll never sleep peacefully again.